Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're bringing you a high-yield, hyper-focused exam masterclass on one of the most transformative periods in human history, the birth of the European nation-state. We are talking about the rise of nationalism in Europe. So, if you're prepping for exams, go ahead and grab your notebooks because we're going to distill decades of complex revolutions, secret societies, and epic unifications down into exactly what you need to know to absolutely ace your tests. Okay, let's dive into this and run through our visual syllabus. We're going to break this whole thing down into 5 clear acts. First, the French Spark. 2, Revolution and the Napoleonic Code. 3, Conservatism versus the Revolutionaries. 4, the unification of Germany. And finally, number 5, the unification of Italy. Honestly, just knowing this structure is half the battle for your exam recall.
All right, Act 1, the French Spark. We really have to begin in 1789, right? Because France was the ultimate catalyst. Think about it. Before this moment, a nation wasn't really a concept. People were literally just subjects belonging to a monarch. France sparked the very idea of a modern nation-state, taking sovereignty away from an absolute king and placing it directly into the hands of its citizens. Now, you are almost guaranteed to see this quote on an exam. The Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich famously said, "When France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches cold." And you need to understand exactly why he said this. He was describing a political contagion. When the French staged a liberal revolution in July 1830 and overthrew the Bourbon kings, it instantly triggered uprisings in places like Brussels and beyond. These French ideas were basically a virus to the old conservative order, and man, they were spreading like wildfire.
So if you get a test question asking how the French revolutionaries forged a collective identity among their people, well, these specific measures right here are your exact answer key. Memorize them. Because they didn't just overthrow a king, they built an entirely new culture. They introduced the unifying ideas of la patrie, the fatherland, and le citoyen, the citizen. They swapped out the old royal standard for a brand new tricolor flag. They renamed the Estates General to the National Assembly. And they went even further by abolishing internal customs duties, creating uniform laws across the board, and making French the common language, intentionally pushing regional dialects aside. It was, honestly, an absolute masterclass in nation building.
Moving on to part 2, Revolution and the Napoleonic Code. Now, revolutions are inherently messy, and the French Revolution eventually paved the way for Napoleon Bonaparte to step in. Napoleon is this fascinating paradox for historians. On the one hand, he essentially destroyed the very democracy the revolution had just fought for. But on the other hand, he completely modernized and streamlined the administration of the entire empire. So the crucial point you need to take away here is this specific document, this Civil Code of 1804, which is widely known as the Napoleonic Code. Exams absolutely love asking for the features of this code. Why? Because it fundamentally rewired European society. Napoleon took this code and exported it to all the regions under French control, places like the Dutch Republic, Switzerland, Italy, and Germany. He completely abolished all privileges based on birth. He established strict equality before the law. He secured the right to property, and, perhaps most importantly for the common folks, he abolished the feudal system and finally freed peasants from serfdom. It was just a massive leap forward for administrative efficiency. Of course, the old powers of Europe weren't just going to sit back and let this happen, which brings us perfectly into part 3, conservatism versus the revolutionaries. Following Napoleon's defeat in 1815, we see a massive continent-wide pushback, and this dynamic right here sets up the central conflict of the entire 19th century.
Just look at the stark contrast between these two factions. On one side, you have the liberal nationalists. They're out there fighting for constitutions, the end of bonded labor, and freedom of the press. And then, on the flip side, you have the conservatives. Driven by the Treaty of Vienna in 1815, their whole goal was to restore the old monarchies, enforce really strict censorship, and maintain the traditional social hierarchy, including the power of the church. It was quite literally a battle between the future and the past. The true anchor of this conservative pushback was the Treaty of Vienna, hosted by our old friend Duke Metternich. Representatives from Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria all got together with one main objective: undo absolutely everything Napoleon just did. They restored the Bourbon dynasty in France, sliced up territories to balance out European power, and set up autocratic regimes that had zero tolerance for criticism or dissent. They wanted to squash that revolutionary spirit once and for all. But, as they say, you can't unring a bell.
The liberal nationalists were forced underground out of fear of repression. And this kicks off the era of secret societies. The absolute archetype of this visionary revolutionary is Giuseppe Mazzini. Born in Genoa, Mazzini was the guy who kept the nationalist dream alive during the darkest days of conservative rule. He founded a secret underground society in Marseille called Young Italy and put together a really coherent program to forge a single, unified Italian republic out of what was then just a patchwork of small states. Now, while underground revolutionaries were dreaming down in Italy, a very different kind of unification was brewing to the north. Welcome to Part 4, the unification of Germany. Let's shift gears and look at the monumental task of uniting 39 fiercely independent German states into a single, dominant empire. Ask yourself this, and definitely pay attention because it's a classic exam prompt. Can the army be the architect of a nation? Well, the answer is a resounding yes, and the absolute proof of that is the nation of Germany. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact playbook of Prussia's Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Let's map it out step by step. First, back in 1848, middle-class professionals tried to unite Germany democratically through a parliament at Frankfurt. It failed miserably, totally crushed by the monarchy and the military. So Bismarck stepped in. He realized that flowery speeches and resolutions just weren't going to cut it. He needed blood and iron. Relying entirely on the Prussian army and bureaucracy, Bismarck orchestrated 3 wars over 7 years against Denmark, Austria, and France. Prussia won all 3, proving its absolute dominance and completing the unification process. This whole brutal campaign culminated in a highly symbolic moment. Picture a bitterly cold morning in January 1871 in the very lavish Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. Kaiser William I of Prussia is officially proclaimed the German emperor. And when you look at the historical accounts of this event, it's striking. It wasn't a democratic assembly of the people. It was a pure display of sheer state and military power, packed with uniforms and generals. This new German state immediately began modernizing its currency, its banking, and its legal systems, instantly transforming into a massive powerhouse right in the middle of Europe. All right, let's pivot south for Part 5, the unification of Italy. Much like Germany, Italy had a really long, complicated history of being politically fragmented. Italians were scattered all over various dynastic states, as well as the multinational Habsburg Empire. I want you to visualize this patchwork map from 1858. Italy was literally fragmented into 7 separate states. You had the north controlled by the Austrian Habsburgs. The center was ruled directly by the Pope, and the south was dominated by the Bourbon kings of Spain. Out of all these different puzzle pieces, only one single state, Sardinia-Piedmont, was actually ruled by a native Italian princely house. Let's move to the next stage and see how this builds, because it's so satisfying to see this fractured puzzle completely transform into a consolidated, unified nation-state. But it's important to note that, unlike Germany, which was built almost entirely by Prussia's powerful army, Italy required a really unique combination of visionary dreaming, shrewd diplomacy, and grassroots guerrilla warfare. To understand exactly how that map transformed, you have to know the 3 main architects of Italy. First up, we've already met Mazzini. He was the brain, the visionary, who planted the seeds of nationalism through his underground secret societies. Then, you have Chief Minister Cavour of Sardinia-Piedmont. Cavour was the diplomat. Funnily enough, he wasn't really a Democrat or a revolutionary at all. He actually spoke French better than Italian, but he tactfully allied with France to help defeat the Austrian forces in the north in 1859. Finally, you have Giuseppe Garibaldi. He's the sword. Garibaldi led a massive group of armed volunteers known as the Red Shirts down into South Italy, and he won the crucial support of local peasants to drive out the Spanish rulers. And here's a crazy historical fact for you. The illiteracy rate was so high back then that many of the peasants supporting Garibaldi had never even heard of the concept of Italia. They actually believed L'Italia was the name of their king's wife. Despite all those challenges, the combined efforts of Mazzini, Cavour, and Garibaldi culminated in this final, absolute high-yield date for your exams, 1861. King Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia-Piedmont was officially proclaimed the king of a united Italy. The long, hard-fought arc of unification was finally complete. So we've seen how the spark of the French Revolution ignited a whole century of change, leading to the creation of the massive modern nation-states of Germany and Italy. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. By the last quarter of the 19th century, this idealistic form of nationalism started twisting and aligning with imperialism. The intense rivalry over trade, over colonies, and military might in regions like the Balkans turned national pride into extreme global tension. And ultimately, in 1914, this very same force of nationalism plunged Europe into the absolute devastation of the First World War. So as you study these unifications and prep for your exams, ask yourself, when exactly does the beautiful idea of national pride cross the line and become a global peril? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and best of luck with your studying.